GTA 5 is an incredible experience in virtual reality, but it's not one without a few caveats. I want to go through a few of these caveats in this video while also showing you how it performs under various graphical settings when running on an RTX 3080. So let's take a look.
Immersed Robot.
Hello everyone, welcome to Immersed Robot, and in this video I'll show you how Grand Theft Auto 5 runs and performs when using the Real VR mod by Luke Ross. And I'll put a link in the description to this video for that mod, so you can check it out there. It's also got instructions of how to install it. I'm hoping to do a tutorial video to go through some of these things, how to install it and set it up, but I'm not sure when I'll get to that. So hopefully you'll do okay with following the instructions on that website. It's not too difficult, but there are a few small hoops that you need to jump through here and there. There are a few things I want to mention regarding this mod before I get into the main part of the video. The first thing is to say that this particular mod has a 3D stereoscopic view within VR, and not all previous GTA 5 mods have had this. They've sort of shown a flat and monoscopic view of the world through the VR headset that you can look around. So it's not been a perfect way of doing it, but this mod works differently and it's more in line with what you would expect from a standard VR experience. The downside of this is that the modders have had to employ a little rendering trick in order to get this running in stereoscopic. At least this is my understanding of it. And the way they do that is that when the game is running at, for example, 90 frames per second, they split that frame rate between each eye, and they alternate the rendering for the eyes to render them one at a time. So each eye is actually only getting 45 frames per second. Now that probably sounds worse than it actually is within the game. You don't notice any flickering or anything like that. It's certainly not like that, but you will notice as you use this mod, whenever you use positional tracking, if you move your head from side to side, or if you look out of the side window in a car when you're driving past, you'll notice that there'll be a slight blurring, and this is almost identical to reprojection blurring that you'll notice in other titles. And my guess is that this is simply because of the way that they are rendering this game in order to get the 3D view working at all. So, you know, it's not perfect, but it's sort of incredible they've got this working in that manner at all. So it is what it is, and it's certainly probably not as bad as you're thinking it would be. It runs generally fine, but there is this reprojection blurring with positional movement at all times. But I'll get into that a little bit more later on in the video, especially when I talk about higher refresh rates. Within this game as well, I've not been able to use FPS VR as I usually would when testing performance, because FPS VR doesn't pick up the frame rate in the same way as it would in usual games. I'm guessing that's simply because of the way that the trickery that's being used in order to render this game at all. So I'm not able to use that. So what I am using is the inbuilt frame rate counter within the mod itself, and you can see that at the bottom of the screen. I'll highlight that with a red square and you'll be able to view the frame rate through there. It's a little bit difficult to see here and there, and I'll probably try to find out a way of working around a different way of measuring frame rate within this game at some point, but for now you can get a general idea, and also I'll have commentary throughout this video to describe how it's performing anyway. This mod uses gamepad. I believe there are ways to get motion controllers in there as well, but I'm not too sure about that. I've not looked into it, and I don't know how well the motion controller support works or how compatible it is with the other parts of this mod, so you'll need to look into that separately. The mod itself comes with 3 graphical presets built in, and these are low, medium and high. The low setting I won't be covering in this video because it's very low. It's sort of focusing on very low end systems with a low resolution. So for the purposes of this test, I'll be concentrating on medium and high settings, changing a few things within there, changing the resolution and experimenting with refresh rates within the index as well later on. The way you change the resolution within this mod as well can be a little bit finicky. You need to go into a separate file within each of these graphical presets in order to manually change them. So this is not really an ideal way of doing it. It can be a little bit of a long-winded way of doing it, but there are instructions again on that on the link to that mod page that I've put in the description to this video showing you how to do that. The instructions on there are quite in depth, so you'll be able to do it as long as you follow those instructions anyway. But that's pretty much it for the introduction. I just wanted to go through a few of these things because this isn't a normal test that I usually do. Using this mod, it's a little bit more finicky, takes a little bit more work to set things up and to dial them in, and and also in recording this footage alone, it's been a little bit of a long-winded process. I've had to come out, change things, and then completely reload the game. But I think it's been worth it, and it's certainly helped me dial in my experience within this game. So with that, let's get into the video, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so I started the game with the standard high graphical preset built into the mod, and as you can see, this first part, it's running at a pretty solid 90 frames per second. There at the bottom of the screen you can see that highlighted in the red square, and it looks great, it runs great with this. As I said before, there is this blurring that you'll notice with positional head movement, where if you're moving from side to side in real life, or if you're passing objects within the game, then you'll notice this slight reprojection blurring as you would in any game which is running in constant reprojection. So that's a slight thing to mention, but it's by no means the worst thing in the world. And by the way, with rotational head movement, it will appear perfectly smooth. You won't get any reprojection blurring at all if you're just turning your head from side to side as you're standing still. So that's something else to keep in mind. That's perfectly fine. But yeah, this reprojection issue is, I presume, just the way the game has to render in order to get this 3D view. So it's sort of a compromise that we have to live with in this game, unfortunately. So within the graphical presets of this mod, you get the option to change the resolution. It renders in a square at 1080 by 1080 per eye, and it's not really running at 1080 by 1080 per eye within the headset. It goes through all the usual processes where it increases resolution, it distorts the image, increases resolution, and those kinds of things. So you're not actually running 1080 by 1080 pixels per eye. It is different to that. But these are sort of the baseline that the modder has set in place in order to run the game. Now you can do that, you can run it perfectly fine here as I'm showing here, or you can go in and then change the resolution up to something like, say, 1200 by 1200 or 1600 by 1600, and I'll get into that a little bit later on as well. But for now, for the most part, in this standard graphical high preset, the game runs at a solid 90 frames per second with occasional dips in certain sections. Hardly worth mentioning those dips, in all honesty, because they're so few and far between that it doesn't really make any difference to the game at all. Okay, so this time around I am still running in the high preset, but I've upped the resolution to 1200 by 1200 just to give a little bit of a sharper image within the headset, and it's noticeable, you can see the difference. And here again, we're generally running a pretty solid 90 frames per second. Again, there are occasional dips, probably slightly more dips than before, of course, but not too many. And you'll see when you get into vehicles and things like that, there can be a little bit more fluctuation within the frame rate here and there, but overall it's fine. In all honesty, it's still running a relatively solid frame rate, and these small dips are not of too much concern. When you get more regular dips within this game, because of the way it's being rendered and the reprojection effect and that kind of stuff, it can be a little bit more jarring than it might be in some other titles. But what you're seeing here is generally okay, but it's not quite as solid as it was with that lower resolution, of course. Okay, so this time I decided to push the resolution up to 1600 by 1600, and as you can see, the frame rate now is much worse. It's dropping quite regularly, and these spikes really impact the experience, to be honest, more than they probably would in another game running like this, because I think it's just the rendering. It just seems to affect your vision a lot more whenever you get these sharp dropped frames and it's not running at the native resolution of the headset. It just seems to be more impactful in this particular title, so that's something to keep in mind with this. So yeah, I can't really recommend running the game at 1600 by 1600 on an RTX 3080. It's just pushing it a little bit too much on this high setting, unfortunately. Next, I dropped things down to medium settings, but I did push the resolution up to 1200 by 1200 rather than the standard preset of 1080 by 1080. I felt like I could go straight in with that resolution based on what I was experiencing with the high graphical settings. And you can see here, it's running fine, you know, solid 90 frames per second. Generally, Again, occasional dips here and there, but very minor, very few and far between, and not enough to concern yourself with. This is a great setting to play on, actually, and it will probably run just as well on slightly lower end cards as well, so that's something to keep in mind. But it gives you that slightly sharper image overall, and as long as you're running at that solid 90 FPS, then it sort of minimises that reprojection blurring that can affect some people. So yeah, this is a great setting to play at as well, if you don't mind lowering the graphics down to medium, and having less population density, less traffic, I guess, and various other things like that. But yeah, it runs great at these settings. Next, I'll push the medium settings up to 1600 by 1600 resolution, and again, it generally runs okay with these settings. The dips in frame rate are a little bit more regular, but for the most part you're still running at a relatively solid 90 FPS within this game. So again, this can handle 1600 by 1600 on this medium setting, and it feels great, it looks great, so this is probably a nice way to play the game overall, really. Depending on what you're going for, I probably would go for a slightly sharper image and reduce it down to these medium graphical presets personally, but it's a personal choice, of course. And overall, I was really impressed with the way the game played and looked on this particular setting. Okay, just experimenting with some of the high refresh rates at this final part here. I wanted to try 120Hz on the medium graphical preset. Now, I kept the resolution to 1200 for this test in order to maintain that 120 frames per second, and as you can see, this is running fantastically. This is probably the best of all the experiences that I've had so far with this game. It looks fantastic and it plays really smoothly. The other thing to mention when running at these higher frame rates, something I noticed, is that the reprojection blurring is far diminished, because I guess it's flicking between each eye faster, you don't notice it as much. So that's something to mention, and something that in these high refresh rates, if your headset is capable of high refresh rates, I would highly recommend lowering the graphical settings down slightly and running at these high refresh rates. It mitigates that reprojection blurring effect to such an extent that it almost transforms the experience for me. So I would say, medium settings on an RTX 3080, 1200 by 1200 resolution within the configuration file, and run it at 120Hz. You will notice the reprojection far less and it looks fantastic. And finally, I decided to try 144Hz refresh rate in the index at medium settings with standard graphical preset resolution of 1080 by 1080, and I initially felt like this was running incredibly well. The 144Hz, the 144 FPS shown at the bottom of the screen looked relatively solid, but as I moved around a little bit more, I did notice it dipping here and there, and overall the experience diminished a little bit. It wasn't quite as good as running at 120 frames per second solid, that solid 120 frames per second, unfortunately. So you can see that the frame rates dip in here and there in places, and it wasn't ideal, unfortunately. But this is sort of the medium bar that I wanted to go to in terms of graphical presets. I didn't want to go to the low setting, I didn't want to reduce resolution any lower than it already was, so I'm not sure this is currently possible on an RTX 3080, unfortunately for me. But you might feel differently. If you want to lower the resolution down even more, you could potentially be getting a native 144 FPS performance within this game, and again, because of the high refresh rate, the reprojection blurring is reduced dramatically as well, so that's something to keep in mind with this setting. I did try the high settings on 120Hz as well at various resolutions, and it just couldn't maintain that, unfortunately, so I didn't include that in this test. It wasn't worth including, but overall I will say that for me, my preference after trying this, my preference would probably be medium graphical preset at 1200 by 1200 resolution, running at a native 120 FPS on the Valve Index. That gave me the best experience overall within this title, and I will be experimenting a little bit more with this game just to really dial in certain settings. But it's an incredible experience, but Some issues, there are some small issues with it which are just unavoidable, I think, in the way that the game engine works, but this mod gives you a significant taste of how incredible this game would be if it had native VR support, and everything, all these small little issues were ironed out. It would be a fantastic experience. But it's worth looking into, and the modder has done amazing work to get it running as well as it does in virtual reality. I highly recommend you trying this. If you already own the game, it's a no-brainer. Definitely give this a try. Okay, so I hope that gives you all an idea of how the game runs on an RTX 3080 using that Real VR mod by Lucros. And again, the link to that mod is in the description, and if you give it a try, then let me know how you get on and what you think of it. And also, for those of you that would like a tutorial, then let me know that in comments too. It's something I'm considering, but I'm not sure there's too much of a demand. The instructions are pretty concise on the website anyway, and I'm sure there must be other YouTube videos out there which show you how to install the mod anyway, so it might be a little bit redundant if I do it, but let me know if it's something you'd like me to cover anyway on the channel. With that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Please hesitantly tap the like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more concise and informative VR content. You can also join our Discord by clicking on the link in the description of this video. And, as always, I'll catch you on the flippity flip.